So good afternoon, everyone. A very special thanks to people who are online for waiting a little bit more. And Professor Leonor Ferreira, he is the Dean of the School of Economics and Business Studies from University of Lusíada, Lisbon. And she is going to chair this session about sustainable finance and sustainability. I think that we are going to have, a very interesting discussion as well. So I'll pass the words right away to Leonor. Welcome, Leonor, to our chat and to our conference. Please go on. Thank you. You have to put the microphone on. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody. It is my great pleasure to share this section and to welcome both speakers, Cristina Caldesalino and Carlos Eduardo Martins. I will introduce them now. This panel will have the first part where the two speakers will explain and describe us the situations. First, Carlos Eduardo Martins will deal with the regulation and the taxonomy, and later Cristina Casalino will share with us the experience at the Portuguese at the bank and is sustainable reporting. Let me now introduce Carlos Eduardo Martins, the first speaker of this panel. Carlos Eduardo Martins has been Senior Portfolio Manager of the Investment and Treasury Division at European Stability Mechanism, where he manages 20 billion sub-portfolio. Carlos joined the ESM FSCM in 2012 and is responsible for investing part of about 18 million paid in capital, in line with the ESM investment guideline. He has been working in fixed income markets for over 16 years, helping develop the ESM's assets allocation, the ESG strategy, and the investment framework since its inception in 2012. Carlos also participated on an IMF technical assistant mission as a reserve management expert. It is also worth noting that Carlos is also focused on the European Union taxonomy development, being an appointed observer to the European Commission platform on sustainable finance as ESM representative. Prior to joining this ESM EFSCM, Carlos spent over 6 years as a proprietary trader for a Portuguese investment bank, covering there a vast array of fixed income instruments and focusing on global macro trades. Carlos graduated in economics at University of Aveiro in Portugal. Later, he obtained a Master Science in Finance from Lancaster University Management School in the UK. And currently, Carlos is a PhD student in economics and social history at the Universidade Lisboa, ISEG. And he is also a visiting lecturer at Universidade Católica at Porto. So it is our pleasure to ask Carlos to please start his presentation. So Carlos, the floor is yours. I hope everybody learn and can enjoy from Carlos' presentation. Carlos, you have about half an hour, more or less, to do the presentation.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this extensive, comprehensive presentation. It's a pleasure to share this panel with Cristina as well. It's a pleasure to meet her again after other adventures. Today, I'll try to come together with a few notes on the recent developments on sustainability. I'll start with the ESG side and then flow a bit into the details about the regulation that has been developed in Europe recently. We try basically to bring you a bit of a summarized view about how sustainability and its regulation will impact financial markets and how financial markets are expected to contribute with their share towards sustainability. First of all, I'll try to say that we are here discussing sustainability because the planet is in great need. We are using resources for a lot of time and using too much resources from the planet. So we need to act relatively soon. Recently, the United Nations presented a map of development goals that are the targets towards which we should follow and tackle our strategies. But basically, what we need to understand is how can investments channel their efforts towards the ESG. And the first question is, what is ESG? First of all, we need to understand the three dimensions. So the environmental side, the social side, and the governance side are factors that can be measured, and they should be measured by investors, but also by issuers. And all of these factors, they need to be brought in the investment criteria so that we understand how the impact that we make and our footprint basically on the reality. Yeah. Can I change it? No. Can I change? First of all, we need to understand probably the whole ecosystem that is surrounding the current sustainability environment. And we need to understand that we have issuers, we have end investors, but in between, we have an array of compartments of the market that also require to have some sort of intervention and assessment and monitoring on ESG factors. So between the issuers and the final investors, we have institutional investors, asset managers, but indices and rating providers, we also can include here the third-party opinions that have a role to play in the whole ecosystem. And all of them have their own importance. And we need to understand how can the ESG part be integrated within their actions. Just for everybody to clearly understand the scope of the ESG, I just brought here this map in which on the right-hand side, you have the extreme conventional action where no care is done towards ESG, and you have the other end on the left-hand side where you have the scope of philanthropy. This case, we are not having into consideration one of the most important parts of investment, which is the risk and the return. So the part we need to focus is in the middle. We need to incorporate ESG considerations, but never forgetting that investors are required to bring in the best return with a minimum risk. I'll bring some notions here so that people can start understanding what are we discussing in all these forums. The first that everybody probably heard about it before is about greenwashing. Greenwashing is nothing else than a false statement about what you're doing regarding sustainability. Unfortunately, the degrees of greenwashing vary across sectors and agents, but it's quite important that, first of all, the definition becomes clearer, but at the same time, that the agents themselves monitor their actions in a way that by enhancing the transparency, but also in increasing the requirements for themselves, they reduce the risk of greenwashing. I mean, the temptation on greenwashing is obvious in many sectors. The green and the social components of financial products, being capital or debt, does attract a significant special demand. And as such, there's always incentive that these agents, in a way, enhance or put higher levels of greenness or social awareness than actually the reality is. So the market itself probably needs to develop their own tools to reduce the risk of greenwashing, and this self evaluation mechanism actually has been working. We've had quite a few cases where the investors actually managed to point out where some issuers were just publishing information that was basically not adherent to reality. So greenwashing is one key component. The other key component, or the key concept, is what we call the double materiality. In a very summarized way, we need to look at the impacts of any activity or any structure, any organization from two perspectives. First perspective is how a company impacts the outside world. So these are things as usual as CO2 emissions, carbon footprint, these sort of things, the pollution that we put in. So that's one key component and a very important one. The other side of it it becomes increasingly important with all these developments on sustainability is how the outside world actually impacts the organization. So the first one, when we call it the outside-in approach, so the second one, the outside-in approach, is more related to a risk profile. So we need to understand what kind of risks will a business face in the future. Whereas the first one, the inside-out, is pretty much what any organization will impact the outside world. These two components will basically, these days, are converging towards what the ESG rating agencies are doing, and they are basically separating these two. So we're going to have, and we do have already, evaluations on the performance of a company with these both perspectives. Then an interesting concept that has been emerging is what we call stranded assets. And usually the most usual example is, of course, the oil companies. The stranded asset is basically a business asset or any related business or investment assets in which we understand that with the development of sustainability, that business will probably run out of business in the future. So if you take the oil company example, as I was giving you, if we have a full transformation for electric vehicles, for instance, and no industry requires oil anymore, then the business of an oil company doesn't exist anymore. And the risk for investors is high when you're investing in something that you know it has a limited lifetime to survive, or at least to be profitable. I just put together a few comments here on when we talk about sustainability, usually coming to mind is always the environmental side, but the materiality map that we need to understand goes way beyond that. So the social component has been enhanced greatly in the last few years. And of course, it goes deep into organizations and how they treat their not only their own employees, but also how they have an impact on their context where they actually manage. So we need to take the stakeholders as also the social impact on the surroundings of any organization. I would like just to finish this part on ESG with the components that we discuss here. ESG, we talk about risks, but this is also an immense opportunity for a lot of companies. We need to understand, obviously, that the risks are immense to the planet. We need to act. Of course, we know that, but the sector on sustainability, the investors that are willing to invest in sustainability-linked businesses are very large and very interested to know how to increase the profitability of that sector. So there's an immense opportunity out there for entrepreneurs and companies that are actually willing to turn into the sustainable side. So this is just a slight introduction to understand where are we going, and more specifically within Europe. The plan that was put out there was that we needed to change. So that there was clear targets for a carbon neutrality by 2050 in Europe, and so a plan was needed. There was launched this idea of a sustainability finance framework in which there are several components that need to be developed within Europe. I'll just put out a few ones. We clearly had the developing of the use of proceed bonds, so financing tools which proceeds from the market will be used only into very specific social or green or a mix of both projects. And that's been the key development in the last few years, I would say the last decade in Europe, and it's been I would say the jewel of the market, in the bond market particularly, about sustainability. And this has greatly improved and is greatly could participate for the development of the funding, the access to funds for sustainable projects. But this would probably not be enough. There was a huge requirement for transparency. So it was greatly developed, the reporting framework, and I'll talk a bit about this in next few slides. But the idea is that companies, organizations are required to report non-financial information in which they put out there to stakeholders the degree of impact and degree of concerns, the degree of measures they are doing in their own business regarding ESG. And so Europe, the Commission tried to put together some rules, and they are quite extensive. And one piece of this puzzle was actually how to measure all this thing. One problem, and that rises to the issue of greenwashing, is that it's difficult to measure, and more importantly, is that when you measure, you need to know that everybody's using the same criteria to do that measurement. So the idea came out of having what we call a taxonomy for the environment, and basically we need to put together some ideas, some criteria that are based in technical criteria that allow investors to have a lot of confidence on by doing those investments and having this criteria embedded. I'll get there. Just having here a small structure about what sustainable bonds are. We have basically two streams. We have the use of proceed bonds, in which funding, the proceeds of those bonds go directly, strictly to green, social, or a mix of those. And these need to be earmarked, but not only earmarked, they need to be reported frequently by the issuer. You have the other side, in which we do not have use of proceeds. So basically you are financing the general expenditure of any balance sheet, but you do have some sort of KPIs embedded in which you self-impose some targets to be achieved. In some cases, this will allow at least a lower cost of funding, or in some cases, this will penalize the issuers that do not get to those targets, and then paying a higher rate for that. Just a small note on this. Going back to the regulation and to the taxonomy, basically the bulk, the core of the decision in the Commission was to have 6 basic environmental objectives by which they need to create the whole regulation, the whole framework. They subdivided into 2 groups. The first 2 objectives are very related to climate. So climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. And there was a delegated act specifically on those 2, and you have the other 4 were also grouped together separately. But the idea of the taxonomy is to have a full legislation in which you could have concepts clearly defined and agreed within the European space, a tool by which you can measure the impact of those activities, and you have a transition tool that allows to channel funds towards those 6 environmental objectives. The principles that guide that taxonomy are basically very similar to the ones we see in old style accounting. So basically, we need to have integrity, obviously, consistency, so that we can expect that the rules don't change throughout the years. It needs to be obviously relevant and based in science, available science knowledge, have the correct proportionality, but most importantly, I would say, is to have the comparability. This will allow investors, when they reach out for certain assets, to be able to compare with other assets and understand which one has a bigger or lower taxonomy alignment, is how we call it. So these are the main guiding principles. And the key idea is exactly to redirect and channel funds from the markets towards those types of assets that are perceived as having a higher rate of alignment with the taxonomy so that they have a bigger impact on those environmental objectives. So the idea here is not, first is not to put a label, very important, and secondly, it's not to oblige anyone to have a higher or lower taxonomy alignment. That could happen, and that will be a normal market functioning, but that's not the key idea. The key idea is that investors have the biggest possible way to have better informed decisions. So as I said, we have a concept that allows us to translate the SDGs into more palpable rules. We have a way to measure, so we can call Fund A with 47%, let's say, taxonomy alignment, and the other one with 7%. And this would not interfere whatsoever on the risk-return analysis, but it would tell the investor which one is greener. Okay. The method that is used, so the underlying concepts on the structure of the taxonomy is that, first of all, the unit that is taken for measure is economic activities. When we look back into use of proceed bonds, we're looking into projects. For the taxonomy, we're more looking specifically for economic activity. And the idea, the first level, let's say the first filter, is that we need to understand if and to which environmental objective is that specific economic activity trying to contribute positively to. Then we have the second filter, which is, okay, so you contribute positively to one of those objectives, but do you do significant harm to any of the other 5 objectives? If you fail that test, you cannot call that activity as taxonomy aligned. And then you have what I call the hygienic filter, which is very related to the social component, although there is no and probably will not be any official social taxonomy. This is the closest that we will get to that for now. We have some so-called minimum safeguards, and these are obviously linked to social components, specifically like human rights and other kinds of social rights that are embedded into any economic activity. So basically, once you follow these tests, you reach to a point where a certain economic activity will be called as aligned with the taxonomy. Now, every organization may have one or several economic activities. And so at the end of the day, what we want is that organization that will issue bonds or has any stocks in the stock market, that specific asset will tell us what is the taxonomy alignment. So what the taxonomy requires is that organization measures according to their CapEx, which is a forward-looking measure, but also their turnover, which would be probably a more present-day analysis, but also the OpEx, which is probably the legacy of their activities. We would expect that an organization that is trying to transform itself into a more sustainable kind of activity, then they would have legacy activities that are heavier in terms of OpEx, so less aligned, but they would invest in CapEx in activities that hopefully are more aligned. So these are the 3 dimensions in which the alignment is measured. And then probably the link to what probably Christina is going to talk about is what we, or maybe not, is what we're going to trying to achieve in a regulation in respect to investment funds. And one of the key objectives of the taxonomy is specifically to know when we buy funds or any asset, the degree of alignment. And so this is the part where the companies, organizations, they do the report. But from the side of the issuer or the investor, of the issuer or the company, they need to communicate to the market where are they trying to present themselves. This is particularly relevant for funds because funds are a group of assets basically, and so they sometimes advertise in which portion of the market do they fit in. And there are 3 parts where they can fit in. They could say, we are not green at all. We don't care about that. We don't advertise at all about that. And then you have what we call the light green, it's the Article 8, in technical terms, the Article 8 of the SFDR regulation, in which there are some sort of claims about concerns, environmental concerns, but it's not a full green. That leads us to Article 9, which is If funds want to advertise themselves as pure green, as only reverting into investments that are related to sustainability activities, then they need to fulfill the criteria on Article 9. And this is probably one of the key discussions going on in the last few, I'd say, months. There are several different regulations, but between the SFDR and the taxonomy regulation, they are basically almost the same, but in legal terms, there is small evolution in terms of taxonomy on how the details and the criteria are set up. The taxonomy, however, the final goal of the taxonomy are the final users, the final investors. But meanwhile, in the process, what the taxonomy tries to target is to make a change. So financial market participants, they need to disclose which kind of funds, which kind of assets are they targeting, are they selling? It targets the companies. SFDR, firstly, only large companies. CSRD will evolve into not so much. Other kinds of companies. But firstly, the idea is that large companies can report and can enhance their transparency regarding the non-financial information. And of course, the last, but not the least part of the target is also the EU and the member states that actually put together measures and legislation that will enhance the look for these funds and how these funds can actually be taken in the market. Just a small note, so we have the taxonomy, as I said, as a piece of the puzzle of the regulation. Companies are currently, or will be required as of this year to report on SFDR. They will soon be also required to report under CSRD. They are very similar, but CSRD goes a bit further. It also increases the scope to the size of the companies that are under this regulation, this reporting requirements. But basically, the taxonomy is one piece of the puzzle. So it's the component regarding the environmental activities that need to be reported. So the taxonomy alignment of that given company needs to be reported within the CFDR report, or later the CSRD report. But that's not the only thing that a company will be required to do under these reporting requirements. They'll also need to report on the other things like the social components and the governance components of their activity. Just a timeline on the CFRD, we are looking into this year having, by the end of the year, to have a full report. The listed companies will be required to do that full report. They will evolve into next year in the CSDR soon, and I'm thinking about the reporting year 2025, maybe 2026. This may be extended in a simplified form even to SMEs. And one key question that has been arising in many forums is obviously that this is quite a heavy burden towards SMEs. So we need to report on your non-financial obligations. This can be quite a big cost within the cost structure of an SME. So probably the idea is that banks may have a key role here. The whole structure of the taxonomy is that we have almost like a cascading down effect on the regulation, but also on the reporting obligations, in which there are also positive incentives for market agents to report. If we think about SMEs, for instance, the SME loans will be within a bank's balance sheet, and as such, the bank will be required to report on those loans. So they need to have taxonomy alignment on those SME loans. So the cycle will not end here. So if the bank eventually want to go to the central bank and get liquidity from those assets, or in any way enhance their taxonomy alignment, they may have the incentive to look for or to have a lower cost supply of loans, of credit towards those activities that are more aligned. So the whole idea here is that the incentive is right towards getting more funding and capital towards green activities. Just to finalize, this whole discussion between Article 8 and Article 9 has been quite intense, especially because the requirements for Article 9 are extremely high. So what we've been observing is that funds are at least for now, trying to stay within the light green. And so we see a small decrease on the offerings of Article 9 funds. Ideally, this is, first of all, an intention from the offering of those funds to not incur into accusations of greenwashing. And I think that's a quite positive outcome. And at the end of the day, the idea is that the funds will match the demand, if it exists, towards a pure green market of funds. I will stop here, and I'll thank you very much for your patience. And if you have any questions, please ask me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Carlos, for this very insightful and interesting. We learned a lot from your presentation. Now, I will introduce Cristina, and Cristina will present us a case study in the experience of the BPI Bank. Let me introduce Cristina to everybody. Cristina Casalinho holds a Bachelor in Science in Economics from Católica Lisbon, School of Business and Economics, and she also holds a Management in Science Master in Finance from Nova School of Business and Economics, Lisbon. Since November 2022, Cristina is Managing Director at BPI Bank, and there is responsible for sustainability. Between 2014 and June 2022, she was Chief Executive Officer of the Public Debt and Treasury Management Agency. After having served as Executive Director between June 2012 and August 2014. Before, from 2001 to 2012, Cristina was Chief Economist at Bank BPI, where now she's back. Currently, and since July 2022, she is also non-executive trustee at Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation. Nonetheless, Cristina is also a lecturer on credit risk management in Porto Business School, and also has a regular column on economics in a local financial newspaper, who I can assure is one of the most read in the country. So thank you, Cristina, for accepting this opportunity to share with us the experience of BPI Bank regarding sustainability reporting. So please, Cristina, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Leonor, for the very kind introduction, and for the also kind invitation to be here today. And thank you very much, Carlos, for sitting next to me again. So as Leonor has already mentioned, I'm going to discuss a little bit with you today how in BPI we have been experiencing, or have been kind of laying down sustainability. So as has already been mentioned, this is something that has started a while ago. Actually, the first heads up happened in 1987, when the UN decided to come up with release a report saying that we really need to pay attention to what we do currently in order not to endanger the abilities of the future generations to pursue their objectives. So to what Carlos had just mentioned, one of the points that the European taxonomy has been enhancing is the fact that we should do not significant harm. This is a concept that actually goes back to 1987, and so this has been with us since then, with I'm not saying little success, but at least I think still to be assessed. Then there was a major stuff that happened in Paris in 2015 with the Paris Agreement signing. And these has actually put sustainability on and in the spotlight. And since then, the European Commission has been pushing for this agenda quite significantly, with laying out the green European Green Plan, and offering all these instruments to actually allow us to deliver on these main objective. And banks here play a very significant role, and that's the role. This role, or how we actually are kind of playing this role, is what I'd like to discuss with you today. So, first of all, just to mention that at the bank, at BPI, sustainability was something that was already a concern, to the extent that the way the bank was set up was already with significant concerns around the transparency reporting. So the governance objectives, or the government priorities, were already quite high in the agenda, and also there was also some very significant concerns about social impact, and also for the bank to contribute for society. And so the idea of having a purpose has already been quite well entrenched in the company, or in the bank. So in these days, when you have the mission statement saying that the bank wants to contribute to the financial well-being of customers and to the sustainable progress of society as a whole, this is something that is quite for a very well embedded in the bank's DNA. And then now we kind of added or supplemented this idea with this addition of the last column that correspond to the Sustainable Development Goals. So now the activities that the bank develops are aligned, or tend to be aligned, or are aimed to be aligned with these 7 SDGs that the government that the BPI has decided to pick as kind of the main the builders of their or the markers of its activity going forward. So, and as also to offer you an example of how double materiality actually is implemented, what we do is we also, or the banks, ask society what should be their main priorities in running the business. So what is we ask, or the banks ask, or the bank asks, and not only the financial community, not only the bank board, the bank employees, its suppliers, but also all the entities that we have in partnerships with universities. So we send out a questionnaire to a large set of people that intend to represent, or to be a quite significant sample of the Portuguese society. And we ask them what should our priorities be, and you have the list of the priorities, and you can see that there is a significant alignment between what we have in terms of impact materiality. We have the answers from the society, while the financial materiality correspond to the answers from the bank, the institution itself. So you can see that the main concerns, or the main priorities, are quite aligned, and you can see that the one that stands out is cybersecurity and data protection, something that goes a little bit back to where the discussion that we had in the previous panel. And then you have the normal or the usual priority that we would be expecting when asking people what should we do in a bank. So financial strength and profitability, have an active risk management. So the ability of the bank to continue to live. And then you have responsible and aligned with customers' needs selling, and best practices in governance and compliance. And it's very interesting that you don't see any significant sustainability concern standing out here or being one priority. But still, what we see is that the bank has been very much committed to sustainability, in the sense that there's a very strong commitment with people, with its employees, with the society, and also has been trying to accomplish something in terms of the planet. So we are concerned and have been deploying programs regarding employees' health and well-being, the balance between professional, personal, and family life, addressing imbalances regarding diversity and inclusion, also trying to attract as much as possible and retaining talent, and also fostering human development. And we also have a quite large volunteering program, and this is something that has already existed in the bank in a more informal way, but this more formal format has been launched 2 years ago. And there's been we have a week where the whole bank actually dedicates at least 2 hours of our time to do some social work. And so this is something that has already existed in the bank, and we just gave a little bit of a more formal appearance. Then you have the commitment to society. The bank has run social programs for more than 30 years now. Now with the support of our shareholder, it means that our financial envelope is larger. So we can commit more than 40 million euros to philanthropy. And these are not only social programs, but also culture, science. We also have scholarships. We also fund a number of or sponsor a number of universities and projects. And we also have run calls for research and health research projects. The bank also endorses sustainability initiatives, namely it has joined the Lisbon European Green Capital Initiative, and also is a partner with the UN Global Compact in Portugal, the same for the UN Human Empowerment Principles, and Grace, that is a Portuguese company that supports sustainability initiatives. For the society, the bank also runs an environmental management system for some years now, and has been very much committed to bring down the carbon footprint, and there's also been funding significant, has been offering sustainable finance to some of the largest companies in Portugal. And you have a few there. This actually goes back to 2021, and you have continued to do this work more recently. So at the onset, how did the BPI address sustainability? First of all, we wanted to understand the context, and the context was as mentioned before, there is a very strong incentive in terms of regulation, but also initiatives and commitments. So Carlos didn't say, but when we mentioned investments, and when we mentioned Article 6, 8, or 9, we are saying that not only are the regulators playing a role, we are pushing investments into these into sustainable projects, but we also have investors more and more also pointing in this direction. And you also have the opinion makers and public opinion media and social media also playing a very significant role here, and are also pushing banks and companies to address climate change issues. We also did some benchmarking analysis, and we also found that the sustainability can offer business opportunities. From these understanding of the context of the context, we evolved into what can we do, and so we started setting up a sustainability committee. We also set up a governance model. We started doing some on-the-job training, and we also started to change our risk policies in incorporating or including ESG risks, something that we didn't have before. Where we stand currently, now we have new products that have ESG criteria. We also have try to offer a new value proposition for corporates mostly, but also for retail clients, namely individuals, mostly in terms of the mortgage loans. We also have been making a huge effort in terms of building awareness. So we've been setting up some workshops, boot camps, tutorials, online training for clients, because we know that in order for clients not only to report but also to be able to also actually apply in some cases to European funds, they need to be more aware of sustainability issues. And for instance, for European funds, we know that in some cases the eligibility to these funds mean that these companies need to submit projects that are aligned with taxonomy. So we need to actually increase this awareness, and this is something we are very much committed to do, besides offering financial instruments. We have also increased engagement and partnership. As I mentioned, we have entered in kind of, we have joined international organizations, and this is a way that, and because we don't do these just for because it makes us good. It is because in most cases these organizations also provide us with tools that allow us to better understand the journey, and also enables us to be better prepared to not only do these ourselves, but also to help the others to also follow along these lines, or to continue to walk this road. So the bank has set in its strategic plan to be a reference in sustainability, and the three main pillars is to support sustainable transition for corporates and society, to lead in social impact, and also to promote social inclusion, and to lead in social and good practice in terms of governance. So the ESG, so we try to address all three ESG dimensions. So how we have been evolving. So we started in 2021 by joining UN Global Compact, and we ended up kind of a year and almost 2 years later with the setup of an independent sustainability department as an independent team, and in between we have calculated and offset the operational carbon footprint. We have launched a number of credit lines aligned with taxonomy, and also have been joining some efforts with other, or pairing ourselves with the efforts of a number of NGOs in Portugal and abroad. So this is the sustainability plan. So again, the three pillars, and we can drill down a bit. And what we have here is that for the sustainability or the environment bit or pillar, we have sustainable transition is the main concern, but not only, we also would like to have firm steps, or take firm steps in terms of decarbonization of not only our portfolio, but also of our operations. That's why, for instance, we have taken further steps in terms of the environment management system. And we also have integrated ESG risks. So we changed our policy, our risk policy with respect to these. Though we have people-oriented culture, we have also reinforced our monitoring of ESG risks and impact. So here we have we are making a strong attempt to start doing some impact analysis, which is something that these topic will evolve. Now we are kind of starting to do things, and we have these technical criteria that we need to abide by, but then we need to assess how these has changed the world. How have our actions have actually to assess if our actions actually have materialized and produced any material change or not. So and this is something that even the European Commission is trying to start coming up with metrics and concepts that would allow for these kind of validation of what we are trying to accomplish here. And then we have the social aspect or access that includes the finance, the volunteering program I've mentioned before, and also the philanthropic work done in pairing with or in partnership with La Caixa Foundation. That for those who don't know, it's the largest foundation in Europe, and that has a annual budget of 500 million euros just for philanthropic purpose. So these are also aligned, as I mentioned, with these priority SDGs, and we there have at the bottom of this bottom table we have what are the objectives in terms of metrics or KPIs that we want to meet by 2024, and they comprise the sustainable business, a goal, also to have a goal in terms of social reach and in terms of governance. So for a total objective of 4.4 billion of sustainable finance, we have attained 2.2 billion in the first year, which makes us very kind of proud of ourselves. But also in terms of the social outreach, you can see that we have already reached to close to 100,000 people, and for 40 million euros have been also deployed or disbursed. We mentioned these. So one of the aspects that we like to emphasize in terms of sustainability is the fact that this is something can only be done in partnership. So we really need to foster a cooperative approach, and that's why we've been joining and being members of a large number of associations or NGOs, in many cases both locally and internationally, for the reasons I mentioned. But we also have been taking partnership with universities and also some working groups that some of them have been set up by the Portuguese authorities, but not only. So how we are evolving, and the fact is that given that we have been, or the bank has progressed already quite significantly in terms of the social and the governance pillars, we have been devoting a little bit more attention to the environmental side. So this is what we want to meet or to accomplish in these next 2 years. So we are developing environmental and climate risk management. So we are improving what we already have. We are also reducing the environmental impact, and this has to do with the calculation of the footprint, the carbon footprint, and to reduce as much as possible the GSG emissions. That also, and if not possible, to compensate them. And you also have the sustainable business I've just mentioned, but we can explore a little bit further. So this is Carlos has mentioned, and Leonora also before that have mentioned the reporting needs or all the transparency. So these are bits or extracts from the annual report, and these are done under the integrated reporting framework. And so it comprises not only financial information but also non-financial data, and these are extracts from this report, which means that these these efforts are actually being considered and communicated in these in the main reporting instrument that the bank has. So in terms of management of environmental and climate risks, what the bank has done, it has changed, it has formalized a new sustainability risk management policy that integrates the environmental risk and also it has kind of merged the environmental risk management policy that existed before, and also the finance sector that also existed before, in order to have a more comprehensive one. And so what we are now trying to assess is companies or projects, if they are located in high risk countries, in terms of social or governance issues, if they have social or governance issues, that if they violate human rights, if they utilize child labor, and also if they preserve or harm biodiversity and culture heritage. And why this is very so much detail, because these days, if you lately, most of the problems companies have been running in terms of sustainability actually are not related with aspects regarding pollution or biodiversity, but actually hinge very much on human rights. If you look all the main controversies companies have been experiencing these days, most of them revolve around human rights. And so this is very high in the agenda. It's something we usually don't tend to relate or associate with sustainability, but this is actually something that is quite high in the agenda. So sustainability is a multi-factor. We associate ESG as to be a multi-factor risk, and it requires actually skills beyond the ones we traditionally have. So that's why in these days, every bank, every sustainability team in a bank has environment engineers, and in order for the European Commission, when it set up or laid down the technical criteria, we struggle with the technical criteria. Struggle a lot, because most of the metrics that we're facing are not the ones we traditionally have been facing. So it means that the skills that are needed for these days to assess the projects, the skills that are needed are much more encompassing than they were in the past. Previously, risk and return, this kind of trade-off was, well, good enough for us. Now that's no longer the case. So we need to, this is much more demanding in the sense that we need to have more information, but we are struggling with this information. Because we don't have the data. I'll address this after, but more or less we need people with more diversified backgrounds. So and it's just not just ones with finance training that will do well in this new environment. So this is an example of what banks do in terms of reporting on loans aligned with taxonomy. So we have all these ratios that we release in terms of turnover, and as just to Carl's point, that we need to address in terms of turnover and in terms of capex. So and you can see that there we have the proportion of total assets exposures in taxonomy eligible, which is different from aligned. So we have the eligible, and then you have the aligned. And so we have all these detail, and you have the proportion of total assets of the trading book. So it's in terms of also in sectors, in terms of central government, and in terms of derivatives. So this is very quite, you can say it's a bit intrusive, but that's the way things are run. And when you need to push for things to be done differently, sometimes we are a little bit more intrusive than we would like to. This is a disclaimer. Why do I highlight this disclaimer? Because calculation process is under development, and in the context of limited availability of information, we struggle with information, with data. We don't have data, or first of all, we don't have data, and second, the data we do have, we don't know how to read it, we don't know how to process it, we don't know how, it's difficult. So we have data. This data effort needs to be also quite broad-based, and we will need to have collaborative efforts here also to have a major database on, for instance, we need to have energy efficiency certificates of all houses, which is something that we don't have. They don't exist. So we need to use proxies, and ECB complains on the proxies that banks use. And so this is actually, we are at the very early stage of this process. So we need to produce data, to have a standard that is agreed among the financial community and between the banks and regulators and who produces the data. And so we are still quite early in this process. Now, this is what the bank also publishes in terms of its carbon footprint. So you have that the GHG emissions, and you have the scope 1, 2, and 3, and still, although there are some guidelines, this is what the BPI publishes. But if you go and compare these with other banks, it's a little bit, we really don't know if these metrics are actually calculated in the same way. So not only we like the data, we also like standards, despite the fact that Carlos was saying that we are now, taxonomy intends to facilitate comparability. We're not there yet. So we also need to have these, to have standards. Then these are the lines that we have on offer and this is what we have been able to attract companies to use the fund or to apply for the lines we have on offering. So you see that you have large companies on which we have been able to raise 326 million euros, and these only represent 6 operations, which means that, well, large companies are doing quite relatively well in tapping these loans or these credit lines. But when you go to small line, to the 2 lines that are dedicated or directed to small companies, you see 52 projects. This is a problem. So we have a business asymmetry. Large companies, Carlos was also saying that reporting only applies for, in the case of Portugal, less than 1,000 companies. The fact is that the other ones will also need to move because of supply chain, because banks will start asking questions, because large companies will start asking questions when they sign a supply contract with them. So, and then that's why we are focusing on promoting these lines. The bank is also providing some training to commercials for them to start asking the right questions to the companies, but also to start having events with clients, to start kind of increasing the awareness, building up awareness, and also knowledge around this. And this is something this asymmetry is something we really need to address, we need to bridge. And again, this is what we were saying, that we have dynamic workshops. We have started these sustainability accelerated. We have these dynamic workshops that are bringing together clients with different experiences for them to learn from each other, because it's not the banks telling them what they should do. They really need to learn by example. And that can only be done by the ones that are a little bit more advanced in this process. And yes, and we also need to train our commercial force. Otherwise, will be very difficult for them to be ready to answer the questions from the clients. We need to have the clients asking the right questions, but we also need to have the workforce able to have the right answers. And And then for individuals, what we do is actually what we have been tending to do is to direct lines to tap green transition, namely in terms of mobility, in terms of use of renewable energy, and also in terms of housing efficiency. Well, I don't think I have much to say here because Carlos has dedicated a lot of time in terms of greenwashing, and you have a typo there. So this is one of the hottest topics these days. Yes, in terms of investment, it's not. Sometimes the only thing I like to say here is that companies that have been considered to have done greenwashing, they have been quite bashed, but I'm not sure, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to kind of put them in the better light, but I'm not sure that they're done on obvious purpose. Obviously they wanted to look better than they are, but but the thing is that these days there is a very thin line between what is greenwashing and what's not. And more than the line is very thin, is that it's moving constantly. Because this is very subjective still very subjective, and moods change and perceptions change, and this is still very evolutive, and we're still changing everything, or not everything, but it's still changing very much. And I stop here. Thank you. I think I've run out of time.
Thank you so much, Christina, and for sharing this presentation with us, and stopping with a very important message to become a reference in sustainable banking. And much more than from your presentation, we understand that we did much more than leading with the bank and describing the process. You are enthusiastic doing it. Possibly you are part in designing the system, and provided that the law is still a bit unclear and having many laws together. So the designing is much more important.